Today, ladies and gentlemen, let's do something that we haven't done before. We're going to be talking about the playoffs a little bit and going through every single team's most surprising player so far. Since we're so early into the NHL playoffs, we've heard so many great stories already, but I want to go through the most surprising players on each team, and this could be surprising in the good ways and the bad. Since we're so early into this year's playoffs, we've already heard so many great stories, but I want to go through the surprising players on each team and the surprising players on the good side and the bad. So make sure you watch till the end as we go through every single team here in the playoffs, and hit that subscribe button if you're new for more hockey content just like this all throughout the year, presented by BetUS TV. Now let's start out today with the first series that is officially over in the first round with the New Jersey Devils versus the Carolina Hurricanes, and I have a lot of thoughts on this. Firstly, even though the series did end in 5, it was a lot closer in those games than I expected it to be. New Jersey put up a heck of a fight with all the injuries they've had. To even really have a chance in this series is pretty miraculous. Now, going on to my first surprising player of the video today, let's start out with the first team eliminated in the New Jersey Devils, and I could go for a couple players that are maybe average or something, but I think, again, New Jersey held up pretty well in this series. A surprisingly good player for me, though, and one that I think really needed to show off his future for New Jersey, or else it could have resulted in a trade this offseason, was Simon Nemec. It's been a rough couple of years for this guy. I mean, he's been somebody that's been trying to gain the trust of coaches, but just has not been able to find that consistency, especially in the defensive end. But I would say all around, he played his best overall hockey in the playoffs. You can see in 4 games versus Carolina, a goal and assist for 2 points, not lighting the production on fire, but I think he's somebody that cemented himself still as an NHL defenseman, at least how he played versus Carolina, which I think is huge for his future, not just in the NHL, but especially with New Jersey. They have a lot of decisions to make with this defense, I think, this offseason, but keeping a player like the Mets, it will be risky, but if he plays like he did versus Carolina, I think he's worthy of a spot. And I think that is a far cry from the play that we saw out in the Mets, especially at points throughout this season. It was pretty brutal at times, but I think he's gotten a lot more adjusted, a lot more comfortable, and the confidence, I think, is a lot higher, which I think, especially for the Mets game and how much he loves to have the puck and how much he really thrives off his confidence, was a big hurdle to climb. I was convinced, though, if he didn't have a good playoffs, that he would be shipped off by New Jersey this offseason. It just made way too much sense, but especially considering how well he played, it's going to be an interesting one with how log-jammed they are on the right side of that defense, especially. New Jersey's defense could look a lot different next year. Now, moving on to the Carolina Hurricanes, and my most surprising player for them, I gotta go with Freddie Andersen here. Now, the thing is, when he is healthy, it's not a surprise that he is a solid goaltender, but when he was healthy in this series, he actually put up some really good statistics, and that's a far cry from what he was at in the regular season, getting just an .899 save percentage. In the 4 games he played, he had a 1.59 goals against average, a .936 save percentage, by far the best numbers for any goaltender in this year's playoffs. I think Ottinger is second in save percentage with like a .914, so it really shows you the difference there. But of course, for Carolina, they cannot have good things in net because in Game 4, he got injured and Kochetkov had to come into the net. He ended up starting Game 5 as well, and Freddie Andersen is day-to-day at this point, it seems like. So the fact that he got injured again, not really the most surprising thing in the world, but I'm just going to put his play out there and put him in this spot because really outside of Andersen, there's not a lot of players in Carolina that I would say were super surprising. Maybe Andreas Lindberg and his goal scoring was a pretty nice part of things, but Andersen's play especially was really inspiring before, you know. Now, moving back to the Western Conference, we're going to go on to the Jets versus Blues series. And my most surprising player for the Jets so far is going to be Jared Anderson-Dolan. Now, for some people, it might be Connor Hellebuyck, but if you were expecting Connor Hellebuyck to not have a struggling playoffs, then I don't really know what earth you're living on. Anderson-Dolan has actually been, though, a fine, pretty solid depth piece, I would say, for the Jets in the playoffs so far, which is surprising because he's only played 7 games for them in the NHL this season, getting 1 assist for 1 point, mostly in the AHL, where his production wasn't even that good either. He was a -33, 19 points, 51 games. Manitoba, I know, was pretty rough, but still, that's pretty brutal. But then he comes into this year's playoffs and has had a pretty strong impact. Again, a depth player, so not much there, but still, in 4 games, a goal, an assist for 2 points. A player in your bottom 6, you'll take that type of production, especially for a guy that had 1 total point in the regular season before that. But JAD has always been a good energy player, and when he does strike fire, he can be a pretty good player in stretches. Putting that together has always been an issue, but in a short playoff series, if he's playing well, that's not an issue whatsoever, and the Jets seem to be getting a pretty good play out of him, which is good to see. We'll see how much that's able to continue, especially as the Jets get a little bit more healthy, if he's actually in the lineup long term, but so far, So good. Now moving on to the St. Louis Blues and their most surprising player here. This one is not even a debate. It shouldn't be at all because easily the most impressive and most surprising has been Cam Fowler. Now, I think I should have expected a solid playoffs out of Fowler. He wasn't even somebody I mentioned in my playoff predictions video, overcoming Winnipeg eventually, but I really should have because he's been such a strong player for the Blues, especially down the stretch. I mean, you see especially the production, which has been quite nice for St. Louis so far. 51 games in the regular season, got 36 points, was one of their strongest performers in those last couple of months, and really seemed to adapt well after a little bit of growing pains to start out in the first couple of games. But it seems like especially he has really enjoyed his time outside Anaheim, enjoyed finally getting a little more of a sheltered role. And you can see, especially in the playoffs, he has been lights out. In 4 games, 1 goal, 7 assists, 8 points. He's been all over the score sheet for this Blues team, and they've needed a type of big-time offensive performer like that. I mean, you have a lot of defensive players on that team, guys like Parayko, who do a lot of the heavy lifting, and the goal scoring has been solid for them so far. But in terms of the consistency, Fowler has had an impact on pretty much every single game for this Blues team, and that has been a revolution for them. I mean, imagine if they never traded for Fowler in the first place. He's been one of their best defensemen since they acquired him, and I think a big reason why they made the playoffs and now are succeeding in the playoffs. I'm really happy, though, that Cam Fowler is back on a bona fide contender because he's always had some great skill that just in Anaheim at the later points was all over the place and inconsistent, but it's really being utilized in St. Louis so far, and that is great to see. Let's move on to my Dallas Stars, who have been a pretty surprising team by themselves, up 3-2 against Colorado without Jason Robertson, without Miro Heiskanen. Really big success so far. I wouldn't say any player has been necessarily revolutionary or anything. I think they've just gotten the right goals at the right times. But somebody that I think has played really well, and considering the injuries, I think has been a big surprise, has been Tyler Seguin. And the production isn't unbelievable or anything. 3 points, 2 goals in 5 games. But of course, you have the huge overtime winner earlier on in the series, which was such a big point for the Stars especially. And in general, I think he's played very well after being injured throughout a big chunk of the season. Getting injured, I think, in late November it was. And just starting out in this year's playoffs, getting his feet under him, it's a tall order for something like that to happen, especially for a player like Seguin, who's had a lot of injuries over the years. He's something that I think has really been an interesting one for the Stars, especially in this year's playoffs. I wasn't really too sure how he'd adapt, especially to start out, but I think so far he's been solid and one of the better offensive contributors, and they've needed him to come up in big moments. And I think he has. Now moving on to the Colorado Avalanche, and this is another one that I think you could also have on the good side. You could have a Gabriel Landeskog as well coming after all of the time that he's missed and how good he's been up to this point. I could absolutely see that. But honestly, the most surprising player for me is actually in the worst direction here in Cale Makar, who I think has been surprisingly human in this series so far. And I think that is one of the major reasons why we are seeing the Avs down in this series. McKinnon has been electric, pretty much factoring in on what seems like every single goal at this point. But Makar has been pretty pedestrian. I mean, you see in 5 games so far, just 2 assists, 0 goals, 2 points, a -3. And I think that is pretty indicative of how he's playing. It seems like something is off. Something just isn't quite right. I don't know if he's injured. I don't know if he's banged up. He might be. But in Makar's case, he just hasn't been the normal Makar that I was kind of expecting to dismantle my team throughout this first round. And hey, if he cannot show up for just one more Dallas Stars win, I would be pretty happy about that. Please and thank you. Now let's go on to another player that I think has been surprisingly meh for their standards here. Going on the Vegas versus Minnesota series, and my most surprising player of the Vegas Golden Knights, I'm going to go with Jack Eichel here. Now, he did have a pretty good effort on that first goal against for Vegas in this last game versus Minnesota, so it is getting a little bit better for him. But I was expecting him to be this unstoppable player for the Knights, at least in this first round, and he hasn't quite been that. And in the first playoffs we saw out of him, he was absolutely electric. A big reason why the Knights end up winning the Stanley Cup, 26 points in 22 games. This year, though, 5 games, 3 assists, 0 goals, and a -6. I don't think he's been nearly as bad as the stats indicate. I do think he's gotten a little bit snake-bitten here and there, but he hasn't quite been the guy for Vegas in the playoffs like he was pretty much throughout the entire regular season. Vegas' scoring in general has been a little bit funky, but it's been the Tomas Hertls, it's been the Brett Howdens as well that are really coming up in those big moments. And it is scary for Vegas. They're up 3-2 in this series, and they really haven't had their best players woken up yet. In Jack Eichel's case, once he does wake up, though, things are going to get scary. Let's get back to the surprisingly good tier here, though, and go on to the Minnesota Wild, who have had their fair share of surprises, but nobody is even close to me compared to Matt Boldy and what he has done. Now, I love Matt Boldy for a while now. He has been a great prospect, a great player for Minnesota. but he has taken his game, I think, to that next level. And there's been stretches for Minnesota where Boldy has been a franchise type of player, but finding that consistency has always been a bit of an issue. But you can see in this year's playoffs, man, zero issue whatsoever. In 5 games, 5 goals, 7 points, coming up in the big moments, looking like a definitive power forward. Boldy has been the complete package for Minnesota so far. And on top of Kaprizov, already looking great as well. Boldy has been that second piece that Minnesota has really craved, has really needed, and he's really showing it now in the playoffs consistently. Now, moving on to the LA Kings and their most surprising player, this is another one that I don't think is really a debate, and it is Philip Danault. I mean, in terms of the playoff performers out there, Phil Danault has been one of the most consistent guys out there, and it's not surprising that he's been a solid player at the very least, but Danault hasn't just been solid. He has been maybe LA's most complete player all around. I mean, look at what he's been able to do so far, man. It's straight up silly. In 5 games, he has 2 goals, 5 assists for 7 points. He's always been a player that puts up his great defensive numbers, puts up some pretty decent goal scoring numbers at the right times. But this season especially, he's combining that defense with that offensive level. And that's something that for LA has been unprecedentedly valuable. I mean, he's really been the only one, I feel like, on LA that's routinely not backed down from the fight, not backed down from the defensive play, and not really sheltered themselves, which is something that LA has had a problem with in these last couple games against Edmonton, just kind of breaking down. Danault has always had that maturity, though, in his game, always been able to come up in the big moments, and he's going to need to come up some more for LA, especially because they're on the brink of a devastating collapse. There's been a lot of talk from Habs fans as well over how good they would be if they had Phil Danault in the lineup, especially on that second line compared to a player like Alex Newhook. It would definitely be a lot better of a situation, but Danault's found his home in LA, and you just got to respect that. Now, moving on to the Edmonton Oilers and their most surprising player here. This one I kind of went back and forth on because there's a few pretty good options. Corey Perry, I think, has been unbelievable for the Oilers in a lot of key areas in this year's playoffs already. Vander Kane has come back and healthy in the lineup and has been pretty solid for them as well. But I do got to give it to Calvin Pickard here, who has been exactly what Edmonton has needed. A fine goaltender. The bar is so freaking low in Edmonton that as long as Calvin Pickard is league average, the Oilers are undefeated in the time that he's played. And it's pretty easy to see why. In the 4 games he's had, he has a .904 save percentage, a 3-0-0 record. It's nothing absolutely revolutionary or anything, but Pickard has just gotten the job done when he's needed to get it done. And especially in the overtime, he was solid, even though Edmonton had the puck the entire time, basically. And especially in this last game for LA, he wasn't tested as much, but he still was really solid, really consistent, and again, didn't let up those goals that broke Edmonton down. He kept him in the game no matter what, and that's what he's done really all throughout his time there. And if Calvin Pickard can just establish league average goaltending for the rest of the playoffs, that gives Edmonton such a major shift in their momentum, and it already has so far against LA. He's been one of the critical reasons why they have gone back in this series. Keeping him in the games has been so important. Now, moving on to the Toronto-Ottawa series, and I'm going to be honest, this is a series that I don't think has that many actual surprising players. I think most players have been up to the level that you would expect out of them. But the Toronto Maple Leafs to start out here, I'm going to go with William Nylander on more of the bad side of things. A lot of people are harping on a player like Austin Matthews specifically, but honestly, he's never really come up in the major moments for Toronto in the playoffs, so I'm not really all that surprised. Plus, of the Four Nations, he was choking opportunity after opportunity against Canada. So at this point, I think this year is proving that he's not that big time player that we want him to be. But William Nylander has been a different story, a continual playoff performer, especially in those big moments. He's had a ton of big moments over the years for Toronto, but this year he's kind of been a little bit more pedestrian for my liking. Points wise, it's all right. 6 points, 5 assists in 5 games. Again, when you actually look at the points themselves and Nylander in those big moments, especially this last game versus Ottawa, a critical game 5, he was nowhere to be seen. And in fact, I think kind of was a little bit of a net negative. I think there were still moments that were solid on Nylander in this year's playoffs so far, but not enough has come together for me to love his play. And that is different from the season before because I continually go to Nylander and I'm like, okay, out of the core 4, you're always the one at least playing well in the playoffs. This year, a little bit of a different story to me, at least. Though that might be really weighted over the last couple of games that Toronto, of course, has lost against Ottawa, but they are pivotal games. You cannot allow Ottawa to come back in this series like they have, and I think Nylander's so-so performance has been a big reason why. Now, like I said, not a lot of surprising players on the list here, especially for the Ottawa Senators. I don't think anybody's really all that surprising. maybe in the surprisingly bad tier has kind of been a player like maybe in Zetterlund, but I think that's mostly just because of the production. I still think he's played fine, but 0 points in 5 games. He hasn't been a revolutionary scorer for Ottawa or anything, still kind of feeling his way around the team, but I still love the physical attributes he has there, the opportunistic scoring he's able to provide. That hasn't quite come up for Ottawa so far, but I'm not necessarily worried. Again, I think the bar is kind of low for both of these teams and the surprising players out there because I don't think either of these are extremely surprising. Zetterlund not having the greatest production after just coming onto the team and not having the greatest production in the regular season isn't crazy surprising, but again, I'm working with very little here. Now, moving on to the Tampa Bay Lightning versus Florida Panthers series, and this one is completely different. We have seen so many surprising performances, so much chaos all throughout, and I have been here for it. Let's start out with the Tampa Bay Lightning, though, and this to me, especially when it comes to my playoff predictions, is by far the most surprising. Let's go on to the poor play of Andrei Vasilevskiy. Now, I will say I don't think his defense has been giving him many favors in this series, but Vasilevskiy hasn't been that Conn Smythe candidate that I thought he could be in this year's playoffs. The big reason why I thought that could happen is that he would want to have major revenge for the last couple of playoffs, not really going his way, but it seems like it's going not his way again this year. And a lot of heat has gone on to Connor Hellebuck, but I think a lot of heat should also be going on Andrei Vasilevskiy, who has an .884 save percentage so far in 4 games, hasn't had above a .900 save percentage since they went to the Cup final in 2022. He just hasn't been good enough. Even though Tampa Bay hasn't been doing him any favors, he has to be better. He has to be better than how he's been so far, and I think his poor performances have been a big reason why Tampa Bay is down in this series. They are right there on the door, man. If Vasilevskiy is able to catch fire, it could completely change this, but so far, it just hasn't been the case. It's been so difficult because on the other side, you have a Florida team that's had so many surprises, so many big-time performances, but I gotta be honest, nobody has surprised me more in this year's playoffs than Nate Schmidt. I mean, okay, because you look at his regular season, and it's fine production, 19 points, 5 goals in 80 games for a player playing little like he has. That's completely fine. But you look at this year's playoffs, and he has in 4 games, 3 goals for 3 points. I mean, if Nate Schmidt finished with 3 goals in a Stanley Cup run, that would be pretty good. That would be pretty surprising just by itself. But in 4 games, he has 3 goals. I mean, I don't think anybody has been weirder and more strange in the scoring department than Nate Schmidt. But you know what, man? Keep going, because sure, whatever magic you have going, might as well keep it going. We'll see how much he's able to play down the stretch for this year's Florida team, but 3 goals in 4 games, man. I mean, you can't really get funnier than that. Nate Schmidt? Nate Schmidt? Now, let's go into the last series we're going to talk about here today, and the Capitals versus Canadiens series. And there's been a few pretty decent surprises on both sides, especially for the Capitals, because I mean, I would not have expected this series out of Anthony Beauvillier of all people. I mean, it's pretty insane just how good he's been so far. In 4 games, 1 goal, 4 assists, 5 points. He's been all over the score sheet for this Capitals team, and again, pretty surprising to me. Now, he had a couple of pretty decent playoff runs for the Islanders way back in the early 2020s, but he's somebody that hasn't had a lot of playoff experience over the last few years, and I was kind of interested to see how he would do, but he's been a core part of this Capitals offense, and he really wasn't much of a factor even in the regular season, but it just shows if you have the right play, if you have the right determination at the right times, anything can happen in the playoffs, and Beauvillier has been a great example. Somebody that I wasn't really quite sure how much of a factor he was going to be as a playoff addition. I was really quite fine with the Capitals not really doing too much of the deadline because I don't think they really needed to, but Beauvillier, as more of a low-stakes ad, has turned out to be a pretty great addition. And then we go on to the last surprising player here today, on to the Montreal Canadiens, and there's a couple of options here, I would say, but I'm going to go over a player on the more surprisingly bad side of things, and go on to Kaiden Guhle. Now, it's interesting because Kaiden Guhle was absolutely electric at the end of the regular season for Montreal, being one of the key reasons why they ended up making the playoffs. You had that, I think, 2-goal game in the last game, or the last pivotal game of the season for Montreal. And I thought he was somebody that would have a major impact in this year's playoffs. The way he plays, the style that he provides, somebody that I thought would have been all over the ice in every department. But you can see in 4 games so far, 0 points, a -3. I think he's been pretty pedestrian, and that's unfortunate because I think Montreal's really needed him to step up, and that just hasn't been the case on the offensive side or the defense. I mean, you had that 3rd goal in this last game versus Washington where he was just kind of like gliding on the ice, getting back on the back check, and it was disappointing for a player that's really been reliable at points. He's had his ups and downs all throughout this year, but it seems like as of right now, he's on the downward spiral. There's, of course, still time in this series to change his fortunes, and I do think Kaiden Guhle will still be a good player no matter what long term, but this year's playoffs is definitely a growing experience for him, as it is for a lot of the other Montreal Canadiens young guns. Now, before we go into today's video, today's sponsor is BetUS TV. Of course, with the playoffs well underway, there is all the opportunities still to make your picks, whether it be in the first round series or onward, and the potential Stanley Cup winner. If you're feeling a specific team like an Edmonton, a Colorado, a Toronto, if you're crazy, you can go on BetUS TV and make your picks there. A big thank you to them for sponsoring today's video. And let's get right back into it. I guess there's not really much to get right back into because that is it for today, folks. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you did enjoy, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and of course, hit that notification bell. Get notified on all the videos we put out all throughout the year. Of course, make sure you share it with all the hockey fans you guys know online and comment down below your thoughts. I want to know for you guys, who has been the most surprising players for your favorite team in the playoffs or just league-wide? Who's been the most surprising player in all the playoffs so far? I think my vote would still have to go for Naismith, honestly. But let me know your thoughts down below. And of course, click on this card for all of my rankings content right in one playlist. I will see you guys in the next one, though. Have a fantastic hockey day, and goodbye.